Emir, we will have about half an hour with you. And my first question to you is, where have you been on 11 July 1995? What were you doing then?
I was working as an interpreter at the United Nations Military Observers outfit in Severance, and perhaps that would be.
So you were working as interpreter in Srebrenica for
the United Nations. Actually, the only thing that actually saved my life was this very prosaic fact that I had a contract with the United Nations, unlike some of my colleagues who were employed directly by Dutchbat. So when push indeed came to shove, it was the fact that had Suljagić, who you were going to hear from today, and I had a contract with an institution that wasn't willing to pay our parents compensation for us being dead. So essentially and that's literally how it survived. I mean, we literally survived after Hassan sneaked into the Dutchbat Operations Center and made a phone call to a retired American colonel in Tuzla, who was the chief of another UN outfit that was known as UN Civilian Affairs, and who was in formal terms our boss. And 15 minutes after that telephone conversation, a little piece of paper came by. We used to call it CAPSAT back then. I have no idea what it actually meant. But there was a small, a very short paper that came through the fax machine that containing our names and warning the Dutch battalion that the United Nations would be legally responsible if anything happened to us. And I assume that's the only reason that they actually didn't hand us over to the Serbs.
So where are you going to be on 11 of July 2020?
I'm going to be here. I'm again going to be going to be here. I'm now working. I'm now officially employed by the Severance Memorial Center as the director of the Severance Memorial Center.
So explain, in 25 years from interpreter who at the last minute and by some higher intervention of UN saved his life, in 25 years becoming a director of a memorial center in Potocari. What happened in 25 years? How does one move from the day of Srebrenica takeover to the position now that you actually have to show to the whole world what should be remembered and how about what happened to you, to your friends, to your family, and to your whole group?
Well, it's not like I had a plan, honestly. I did a lot of things in the meantime, but I think that by far the most important part of my career, and I mean that, including this job, was spending some 2.5 years at the ICTY as a reporter, watching trials going on a daily basis, getting an opportunity to acquaint myself with a vast amount of documentation, evidence, reports, transcripts, directives, you name it. I read them all, pretty much. I think the only person here on this panel who read more is Mr. Nice himself. I'm not really sure. Nena, you and I could go to, we could compete about that. But the only person I take my head off to is Jeffrey Nice, because I know I've watched him for every day for.
Nena knows I have to intervene at this stage and say that most of what I presented is bluff, and that I relied on somebody like Nena and you, Emir, to do the actual reading.
Yeah.
Nena will come back and reinforce that in that answer soon. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but if I didn't get it in now, she would.
All right. So it's it's always a pleasure to hear from you, and once again, but the fact that I was there, I got out of Severance in '95, and then like 7 years later, I'm at this international court that is actually trying the very people that hurt me for the very things that they did to hurt me, among others. And it was a very often, sometimes it was really, sometimes, you couldn't get, and all the while, I actually had to report. So, and I wasn't only reporting for the Bosnian media, I used to write for IWPR. I managed to squeeze in a few pieces in other English language publications, and none of these people actually really cared about how I felt. So what I had to do, I had to go from the court into my office and type a report that would be understandable to my English language London-based editors, who, for all I knew, no idea what the hell was going on and what the hell I was writing about. All they wanted was an article that was written professionally. And as much as it helped me see the big picture, it also took a toll in emotional terms. And then I realized after 2.5 years, I was no longer capable of doing that job. I was no longer, I just couldn't. I've had enough at one point.
Emir, can you pause? Can you pause here? Do you remember one particular moment when you broke? Was there any breaking point when you were watching it as a journalist who has to report impartially and objectively and accurately, and putting your emotions aside, because what would they help you in reporting? And was there any moment of realization how hurtful this all is for you?
There were actually two moments that I remember. One was I covered, that everything was kind of organized around the Milosevic trial, but there were some really important Srebrenica trials going on at the time as well. And there are two moments. One of them is actually related to a Milosevic trial. There was a witness, there was the only surviving witness of a massacre in May '92 in a village called Glogova, just outside of Bratunac, my hometown where I grew up. And the only surviving witness was an old man who hid in the river and literally kept breathing through a straw, hiding in the local river. And when he was describing, and I don't know why I broke there and then, but what was interesting that is he was describing being led to the execution site. He described how their Serb neighbors stood by and watched on, and then he said, I looked up a little bit and he seemed sad. But he used the word that probably only out of all of us here, only Adina, Hassan, and probably Amina will understand. He used a tersicism, he used the word kaharli, which is a very localized, very local kind of, like sort of Eastern Bosnia microculture was, and then I could hear in this perfect Serbian with a perfect Belgrade accent, interpreter saying, "Prevodio ti mole svedoka da ponovi poslednju reč." I had no idea why I did that, because, it actually meant, the interpreters are asking the witness to repeat the word. I have no idea why exactly that moment, but something really literally broke in me at that point in time.
Would you be so kind to write down this word to us? So this one word came straight to your soul and your heart,
exactly.
Understanding
that's the word.
That they were targeting not just you, but you were targeting the heart and soul of your community.
To me, that was it. And then the fact that, the person who interpreted this without, through no fault of her own, was someone from Belgrade who may have been in Belgrade back at the time, who may have been in any other part of the world, I just, somehow there was this like confluence of emotions and I literally broke. And the other moment was and I wrote about that, it was the moment that the security officer of the Bratunac Brigade pleaded guilty to crimes against humanity, war crimes, and blah 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 for Severance in July 1995. This is the guy I knew before the war. He knew my father. I knew him during the war. I met him on a relatively frequently. I see Hassan Nohanovic is here as well, so he can testify to that later on. And the man's name is yeah, Neraspoložen. Yes, that's what it means.
Neraspoložen, thank you.
Yeah, it's more than Neraspoložen. It actually means, you know, there's a moment, there's a nuance of sadness there. Anyway, so when Nikolić pleaded guilty was also another moment that when I broke up, because
Momir Nikolić.
Yes.
Momir, because there's another Drago
Nikolić as well, yes.
Yeah,
because I went straight to the moment in July 1995 when he lined all of us up, all the local staff, all the UN and various other international humanitarian agencies, employees here in Severance, and it happened here at the building that now houses the Severance Memorial. And he lined us all up, and you know, we literally all knew that our life was in his hands. Our lives were, you know, in his hands. That he was going to survive, and he said, you know, and there was this moment when he literally faked in front of Hassan that he didn't know what would happen to his family. And watching this guy in court plead guilty and was just was something that also once again broke me in ways that I never actually really thought about it again until this day. But
yeah, we'll move on from there. We will have plenty of opportunity. We don't want to put you on spot. I just one of the reasons why we have this at the early stage of our course is never to forget the human element in a genocide, because we all tend to overanalyze it through political, historical, or legal prism. But there is such an important human element in it, and I think it is really important to have it at the beginning of everything. So coming back to your development, so your next stage was academic career. You wrote PhD about related topic.
Yes. The next stage was I went back home. I took an MA. Part of this really great program that was developed by the University of Sarajevo and University of Bologna. I got to spend.
Emir, would you be able to speak much more to microphone, because sometimes such a crucial word escapes me, and because every word you are saying to us is going to leave a lasting mark on us. So yeah. We want to hear.
I just hate staring at myself on the screen. All right, I literally, you know, I feel like I'm, you know, standing in front of a goddamn mirror, you know, for hours and on end, because I'm
look
zooming
at Jeffrey and learn for him.
All right. So
that's good way.
So I took my MA in this. You know, we got to spend 4 or 5 months in Italy, in Bologna. It's a great place, great university. Then I did my PhD at the University of Hamburg. And the only reason I did that in Germany was because I could actually get a scholarship. I wasn't necessarily a very rich person, and the German government was kind enough to fund my research. Part of it was, not part of it, literally all of it was based on the what we now refer to as ICTY archive. I did also some interviews, but I mainly focused on the archives, and what I wanted to do is, now I would have done it completely differently, of course, and anyone who has done a PhD knows that, you know, knows precisely that at the moment you're done, you're sure that there was a better way to do it, and I probably would do it in a completely different way now if I was given a chance or if I had the chance to do it. What I wanted to do is I wanted to read, essentially, I wanted to show that there is a different kind of readout of the archive other than what has been seen in court. And what I mean by this is that the problem with establishing the facts as part of the judicial process is that they're focused mainly on sending someone away to prison, especially within an Anglo-Saxon sort of legal system, where every side presents a story, and then the story that carries more weight, is more credible, has more facts, is wins the day. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to write that's how I started. Wanted to write a thesis about what does it actually tell us about historical record? What does it tell us about the policies that Serbs pursued in Bosnia? What does it tell us about Serbia's involvement? What does it tell us about? And I all sort of packaged it neatly, or as neatly as I could, within the what's euphemistically referred to as the policy of ethnic cleansing. I wanted to show that you could actually see a pattern that was repeating itself with some small modifications from Croatia through Bosnia all the way to Kosovo over the course of almost a decade. I'm sorry. Anyway, so that was my thesis, and I kind of wanted to identify practices that we now subsume again under the aegis of ethnic cleansing. Although I kind of myself came to believe that, I had 10 years to research the subject even more, and I realized that the problem with ethnic cleansing, and I'm really glad that Edina Bečirović is here and that she's listening to it, but she was the first one to, literally is a trailblazer when it comes to Bosnian social science and genocide study, and she was the first one to get out of that sort of narrative whereby genocidal intent and genocide is something that should be focused on July 1995 and the area around Srebrenica. When in fact, if you look at the practices in 1992 and 93 and 94, you will see that the intent was there already, especially in the starting in April and May 1992. So anyway, I don't know if this sounds coherent at all.
No, it is very coherent, absolutely. So you made an interesting development as working as a young person in Eastern Bosnia because of your good knowledge of English for UN.
Right.
And you survived the genocidal massacre of your friends and family. You went to ICTY, the court that dealt with the very crimes that you have witnessed and were not able to prevent. And after a breaking point there, you moved to a higher level of understanding, academic understanding, that you could generalize what was happening to you. So you are explaining actually your own journey to discover what happened to you and what is the truth that can be shared with the world. Am I right, or am I over representing what you just said to
us? You make me sound like I'm Raphael Lemkin, and I'm certainly not. So that's the only thing. Other than that, I'm completely fine with what you're saying.
Thank you so much. So what was the next stage?
Well, the next stage was one of the most tragic mistakes in my life. I went into politics, and I spent 8-10 years involved in politics. I liked it. I liked doing campaigns, mainly what I did. I served 2 short stints as a minister, once as a Minister of Education and another as Deputy Minister of Defense, which was far more suited to my sensibilities. Education is just like, people there are too nice. And then back in 2017, I started teaching again. I stepped out of politics, started teaching, taught for 3 years. And in October last year, I was appointed, back then it was acting director, and now I'm a full-time director of the Severance Memorial Center.
Emir, I need to go back to your introduction of your political career. First thing, what motivated you to go into politics? What did you think you could have achieved in practical executive branch? And why it was the biggest disappointment? Did you achieve anything at all in your engagement as a politician?
I mean, looking at this point, one of the achievements that I'm kind of proud of is that what I did back in 2015 eventually reinvigorated and relaunched the Bosnian NATO accession. I'm very much of an Atlanticist in doctrinal and ideological terms. I'm no fan of the EU myself, but I'm a great fan of NATO, and I believe that NATO membership is a lot more important than anything that we get. I know probably a lot of people disagree with me, but hey, you know, that's how I see it. And the reason I did it, to be completely honest, I'm not really sure that I even made a conscientious decision about it. When I returned from Germany, that was the kind of crowd that I was hanging out with, literally, and they offered me one day, hey, would you pitch in our 2008 local campaign? And we did a good job because we won the Social Democrats back then won the mayorship of Sarajevo, like the first time after 1945. And back in 1945, they actually had to use violence to get it. So we managed to do it for them without, with ballots. So, and then I went on doing 2010 general campaign for the Social Democrats. They also won in a landslide. I fell out with them in late 2011, 2012, because I felt I wasn't necessarily being supported by the party in what I wanted to do and in what they told me they wanted me to do. Ended up in a huge row with both the Catholic Church and the Islamic community in Bosnia over the place of religious education in public schools. Left it, came back again in 2014, ran for presidency, came in third with 120,000 votes. And then in 2015, end of 2015, I just sort of ended it all and went to.
So now at your new position as a director of Memorial Center of Potocari, what do you think your mandate should be, and what do you hope to achieve, and how can we help you in achieving this?
My God,
a small question. We are nearing the end, so I thought make it easy for Emir.
All right. Well, what I want to do. Okay, let me put it. Part of my vision for this place is the Severance Memorial as a place where if you ultimately want to come and study the Bosnian genocide, you want to come to the Severance Memorial. That's the kind of place that I want to go. I'd like to see, and we're already working on it. I'd like to see a proper archive. I'd like to see at least what's publicly available from the ICTY archives, archived here and used in a transparent manner as a proper archive. I know there's a lot of documentation that's been made publicly available by the ICTY, but it's no archive. I mean, it's not searchable. People can, even scholars can, have a hard time using it. So that's one thing that I want. I want to also break out of this July 95 narrative, to be honest. There's very few things that are as offending and as offensive as that. Yes, of course, July 1995 was by far the worst thing that happened to us. And when I say us, I mean the Bosniak community from rural Eastern Bosnia. But prior to July 1995, thousands of people have been killed. And I mean literally thousands of people. And there was far more involvement of Serbia throughout 92 and 93 and even 94, then in 95, even though we know there was Serbian involvement in 95 as well. And we know that for a fact. I mean, there was, you know, the whole idea of Scorpions being a paramilitary unit is maybe, you know, something that you can maybe sell to a disinterested Western audience, but we, you know, the people who are in the know that Scorpions were actually officially part of the Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Serbia, and the story. So, but what I want to do is I want to break out of that.
I suspect that Nena or you should just explain to those who may not know about Scorpions a bit more about that.
We will show the video of that as well. Yeah.
All right. So that's what I want to do. I want to, and we're sort of making our initial sort of probing the ground on that front. What I want is, I want to try and, you know, as part of that, I want to try and establish the number of the people who were actually killed here between the moment that the enclave was established until July 11th. Believe it or not even the people who were killed in the attack between July 6th and July 11th are counted among the 8,372 people who officially are the victims of July 95 events. I also want this place to be a place of research. I want it to be a place of learning. And what you can do for us is we can see if part of what you guys do in Dubrovnik, we can organize here next year. So what I'd love to see is young men and women from across the world coming here, spending time here, getting acquainted with what happened here. Maybe, you know, have an opportunity to see some of the things that we are doing, and we're doing some really good stuff this year. We just completed a small oral history project with children. I mean, now they're grown up men and women, but they were children during the siege of Srebrenica, resulting in some 70 hours of interviews with, you know, what's the siege and the fall of Srebrenica look like through the eyes of children. We're creating our own collection of artifacts that were lent to us by families, you know, artifacts belonging to families, of July 95 and their families. We're hoping to get, you know, our stuff also from the ICTY or ICR, SMT, whatever you call it now. That's the bottom line, really. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, I could go on.
No, I understand. I completely understand. And every year we have a 3 or 4 days conference for our alumni and whole GNF community. And we would love to come at some stage in October, if situation allows, to have our shorter conference with many speakers and to be able to do it at your site, and in this way to connect all these wonderful people from all over the world which have this misfortune that the memory of this important recent history of Europe is not kept in their school curricula in the way that it should. So what we are doing is filling the gap. And my students had 3 weeks time to make on their own initiative what and how should Srebrenica remember, and 3 weeks were enough to make me even surprised and amazed by intelligence and motivation of these young people. So we will certainly keep you to that. And if you all forgive me, I have one question that I would like to ask Emir and Hassan. And the question is follows, and Emir, feel free if you don't think you want to deal with this particular issue to say, no, I'll pass this one. You and Hassan shared a unique human experience as a young man in Srebrenica, and in a course of 25 years, it connected it in a way that only family members could be connected in traumatic family circumstances, but you were caught sharing this traumatic experience that sort of connects you beyond friendships or family ties. So my question to both of you, and Hassan will have a chance to answer this in his way, we all struggle how to, as outsiders, how to connect with people who went through this sort of political violence caused trauma. We don't know how to express and our interest and our empathy, because there is always this distance. Who am I to show you empathy? Who am I to ask you how you are, because I will never be able to understand what you feel. So can you tell us how wrong we are to assume that people who went through this traumatic experience we see either as victims or survivors? Is there any other way you would suggest me and us as a group to treat you and to engage with you? Because we really want to know, what you feel, but very often we don't know how to relate to this.
Oh, now you sound like a lot of my friends, my wife included.
Okay. Send her my greetings.
Honestly, I've outside professional conversation, right? Outside, once again, I've spent 2.5 years at The Hague, and I loved spending my time. Every opportunity I had, I used to prosecutors, investigators. I loved doing that, right? And it felt in a way, The Hague for me, for a lot of, for quite a long while, felt like, the only place where who and what I was actually natural, all right? Just everybody there was about genocide. Everybody there was like, let's go out and get these guys, and everybody in their way. I mean, some people did a better job, some people did a poorer job, but I mean, it was like, that was it. That was it for me. That was like the capital of genocide, right? It felt normal. It felt natural. Come on. There's this like really great guy from England, and hey, you know what? He actually knows what Glogova is. I mean, come the hell on. How unlikely is that? But then, once you get out of there, I felt that I was most at ease with people who didn't know, or didn't show to care, or didn't want to go there, who maybe knew but didn't want to go there at all. All right, we would talk about movies. There was a bunch of people who at one point came from, I remember, Switzerland, my girlfriend and I, and all of them. We went out and hanged out, and there's this really great jazz festival in The Hague. So and I went to see, I don't know, Aziza Mustafazadeh and Aldi Meola, and come on, so I felt most of these outside my professional life, when I was not being asked questions. Now, that was a different stage of my life. I was 27, 28. I left when I was 30. So maybe it also has to do with the age, right?
Did you ever feel as a victim?
The only time I felt like, no, here's the thing. I've tried a way. I tried as much as I could to run away from that role for myself, because a lot of people, once again, people who knew and people who, and I understand, you really have to walk around. A lot of people have this inclination to walk around me as if they're walking on eggshells. And okay, but I never really wanted to see myself as a victim. I never really wanted that place.
Nena, can I, forgive my interrupting.
You may. I'll give you a full.
And I have an eye on the time, and I've got the mental list of half a dozen questions I would like to ask Emir.
We will have discussion time, Jeffrey, at the end.
But can I suggest, just having heard Emir speak and looking at the pictures of people, many of whom will have had no direct experience of this kind, even through family members, that we really make sure that those who have no such experience, particularly those perhaps from England, may have a chance to formulate one or more questions to ask of Emir and Hassan, because it's such a unique opportunity for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for this. We will have a time for questions at the end, at least if Emir also can join us at the end. I completely appreciate, but before we go on this, I would like to make distinction. What is now a distinction between victim and survivor? So did you ever think I'm a survivor, or you are just—
I did. I liked, survivor, I mean, I prefer to see myself in those terms, because it actually means a lot more than just surviving any particular event, even if it is such an event as Severance. I believe that survivor is more of a more fitting term, but one of the reasons that it is a more fitting term is that struggle never stops. You know, the war didn't necessarily end for me in '95. What went on, I had to make a living. I had to take care of my mom and sister. I had to find a place for us to live. I had to find a job. And I had to balance all of that with this, you know, objectively speaking, huge trauma that I was carrying around with me. And it took me, for instance, it took me 4 years to write my first piece about it. And it's not for lack of trying. I tried to write about Severance after I got out of there, but no, and then tried several more times. And then the first time that I actually managed to write, and it was a long form, 4,000 words. The first, it was literally 1999. It was July '99. So 4 years it took me to come up with the first article that was, you know, coherent, that had a head and tail, and it was actually telling a story.
Thank you so much, Emir. I hope you can stay with us for the rest of this
and let me just
morning.
look at you. Let me just look. So you guys are finishing at 11:45, right?
No,
12:30.
1:45. Yeah, because we would
1:45.
like to have
Right.
you in the general discussion as well. But before you leave, please, if any one of you who heard Emir talk for the first time in their life, and some of you were not familiar with his work and curriculum, do you have any pressing questions to Emir after hearing his fascinating?
Before anybody raises their hand, I just want to ask Nana and Jeffrey. The thing is, I actually have another Zoom at like in probably in half an hour with ICMP about a project that we're applying for, you know, working on together. So if I sort of sign off at one point, I just want you to know it's actually having to run a company or an institution that I'm dealing with on a daily basis as well. So,
Oh, absolutely.
and if I may suggest, once again, I don't want to interfere with your plans, but if you guys have any questions for me, ask them now rather than later, because I'll
absolutely good idea. Completely
Thank
good
you,
idea.
Emir. Thank you. Okay, the floor is open for questions, and I would like to greet Professor Edina Bećirević, who is in Sarajevo currently. She just probably took a break because I see her picture and no video. Edina, if you're listening, oh, here is Edina. Welcome, Edina. Thank you so much for being able to join us. We know that it's very busy time in your university world because we have exams and all important things, but wonderful to have you with us. And our dear friend Hasan Nuhanović, who will be our next speaker. Hasan, welcome. I also see some other people joining us. Fahredin Verbovci from Pristina, Aidan, and Sarah here from London, I assume. Welcome. And did I miss anyone else? Yasser, I already greeted. Yeah, so welcome all, and please, floor is yours for asking Emir.
And before, I really want the student participants to ask questions, and I've got, of my bank of questions, I've got one general question, Emir. One of the things that we consider is how, for many terrible conflicts, for example, the Second World War, people put the history behind them and they engage in active, by choice or otherwise, a process of forgetting or at least not talking about things. That has not been what's happened in Bosnia. It's been talked about and remembered as a result of many, many processes, including the trials, but other processes. Do you have any view about whether it might have been better for people to have set the history aside and got on with their lives, or is it better, and for what reasons, to remember and to be active in the process of remembering?
Well, that's $1 million question. We see, as we can see in the United States these days, the Civil War, the American Civil War took 150 years to actually end. So, but my experience, my view, is that it's, better to get the facts out there, at least facts, even if we don't agree on those facts. Even if we don't agree, even if we might interpret some of the facts differently, as long as there are facts, and that's like the really unique value of the ICTY, that facts were established with clarity and beyond, not beyond reasonable doubt, beyond the idea of a doubt. That's how much the court bent over backwards to ensure that even sometimes even to the detriment of what you would refer to probably in more philosophical terms as the truth, but the court bent over backwards to ensure the proceedings were, ensure the legal proceedings were impeccable and beyond reproach. However, once again, I still, but even so, the facts that we have, the mountain of paperwork, the mountain of documents that we have, is a better way to proceed than what happened in Yugoslavia under Tito. Now, the reason, there's I'm not always fond of Dejan Jović, but he's got an interesting, proposition that part of the reason that Tito's regime was so reluctant to deal with the past is that the amount of crimes, the number of people who were killed in internecine conflicts and or by Nazi collaborators would undermine the myth of brotherhood and unity. And this is something where it's part of the reason that we didn't deal with the Czechnic crimes in Eastern Bosnia, part of the reason we didn't deal with Bleiburg, part of the reason that we didn't deal with a lot of historical episodes of such nature, is that they would have undermined the myth and the whole sort of founding myth of Yugoslavia, of socialist Yugoslavia, which was brotherhood and unity. Now we have the facts, and what we are dealing with right now is as a sort of a war for the interpretation of the war, and that's something that I'm quite happy is the wrong word. I'm quite content to be part of that, take part in that. That's no problem. That's completely logical extension of these processes, and that's something that's far more acceptable in the end of the day than lining people up and shooting them by execution squad.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could I just ask a question?
Yes, of course.
And just on the back of Jeffrey's comments, when you're talking about this being a war for the correct interpretation of...
No, I said a war for the interpretation, not for the correct interpretation.
Okay, so a war for the interpretation. How you've obviously been in both, you've experienced sort of journalism, politics, academia. How do you feel, where did you feel most powerful in putting forward your interpretation or making the most impact of your interpretation in those roles?
I don't think there is any particular situation where my contribution would have been particularly powerful. But in general terms, writing about it is, writing is something that I did for a living. Writing is something that I still do, and hopefully when I'm done with the memorial, I'll go on writing. And it's my media, my genre. So writing about it, no matter where or what, is something that makes me feel as if, taking part in this, what I believe is and it should be the proper narrative of what happened in the 90s in I don't know if I answered your question, but that's, you're asking me to tell you, if I mean, you're not asking that, but you know, I could tell you, publishing a piece in New York Times or Boston Globe, an op-ed on Bosnian genocide, back is, I guess, when you've survived what we've survived, and when you're writing, I guess that's it, right? When they run your piece next to Thomas Friedman's piece, I don't know.
Thank you, Emir. Anyone else, please?
I had a question.
Ruby and Holly. Ruby first. Okay, and then
Thank you.
Holly.
So Emir, you mentioned that it took you 4 years to get to that point of writing about your experiences. I was just wondering, as a writer, how you approached that process of writing about something so personal to you, and I guess what, if anything, you gained out of that process of writing about it.
The long and the short answer to what I gained would probably be a liver problem, but that's sorry, my thyroid exploded at one point. I have only one sort of thing that I keep in the back of my mind, which is that less is more, and I approach it in a very minimalist fashion. I don't explore how I feel today. I don't, you have to be really careful when you write about these things, because sometimes, the memory is a very tricky thing. So when you're writing about your personal experience, what you have to make sure is that maybe, what you're remembering is not your subsequent interpretation of what may have happened, but what actually happened. This is something, again, that people who are involved in criminal prosecution probably very often come across when dealing with witnesses, whether it is, and you have to be really careful not to leave any of the, how can I say, fingerprints of that sort on what you're writing. And the other thing, which is also something that I tell my friends who write, there's a few survivors who have recently, published their memoirs. What I tell them is that less is more. Less is always more. Just tone it down. No big words, no big feelings, nothing. Just describe what happened, and use the most plain words. Don't look for any fancy word, anything. Just like in the plainest way possible. That's how I do it.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Holly and then Lorena.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been fascinating. But I suppose I had a question that was, obviously we're kind of meant to be asking you questions and that you have this unique perspective on it. But you also must have had a very unique feeling on it as an individual, as comparative to a sort of collective persecution. And like Adam's list pointed out, you've gone through many processes to kind of deal with this and process it on kind of quite an intellectual, factual level. But obviously you also have to deal with it on an emotional level. So I suppose I wanted to ask, how do you feel about it now when you look back? What does it actually make you feel when you think about it, having gone through those years of different processes and now in the position of kind of responsibility that you have?
Well, once again, the long and the short answer would be that that doing what I'm doing now, I feel a sense of satisfaction that I've never felt doing anything else. Simple as that. Now, when you come to work to a place like this, you necessarily have to be able to compartmentalize. I guess that's the word, compartmentalize, right? Thank God we're not speaking German. They only have like really long words. Now, you have to do that because I had to come here to work. And if I yield to my emotions on a daily basis, then I'm not capable of doing my work. Mm-hmm. And I'm here to do a particular job. So what I feel now, I guess, when I leave work, when I go home, also this is not the kind of work that you leave at home, right? That you leave at work. This is something that comes with you to you wherever you live. And I guess that's the time for reflection. And more recently, I've spent more time here, and I've enjoyed the company of people who were with me in Srebrenica during the siege. We get to talk. I mean, let me put it this way: I'm still highly traumatized. Okay, and the only thing that really works for me is that I have managed to compartmentalize, to sort of to ensure that my personal experience does not affect how I do my job here, because it's a job. I wish, there was somebody who would have that baggage leading this place. But at this point, I believe that baggage is also kind of an advantage. So there is all kinds of knowledge about this. But there is a very specific kind of knowledge that you can only have if you've been here and if you've survived this. And no matter how much you study, no matter how much you research, maybe with one or two exceptions, it's very often, there's the guy who works here, who's our curator. He looks at a photo from 1993, a black and white photo, and he recognizes 5 people and knows the exact villages that they come from, and he knows their families. And this is something that we bring to work with us, and that necessarily brings to bear on how we do our job. But once again, I think that at this point, it's an advantage. I'm really looking forward to a point in time at this center when people making executive decisions won't necessarily have to be people like me.
Thank you so much. So the next one is Lorena, and then Nathan.
Guys, do you mind if I smoke? Because one of the good things about Zoom is being able to smoke and smoking.
You are in a good company. Jeffrey and I would know what political correctness is, but health correctness. We would ban you if you would be with us. But political correctness is wasted on us, I think. Just common sense, and no above authority to tell us what to do. This is all right. Common sense and love for people. That's most important thing, respect and love for people. Okay, Lorena, please. Lorena comes from Kosovo.
Yeah, I'm from Pristina. So this one may be a bit in a more personal level, if I can say so. But when the war broke out in Kosovo, you were in the aftermath, sort of say, of the whole experience. So what was the air back then among Bosnian people with regard to what's happening in Kosovo? I mean, in terms of empathy. Like, what
support? In terms of empathy. Okay, let me put it this way. I used to work in a newspaper, right? And okay, let me rewind back a little bit. Immediately after the war ended in Bosnia, there was this movie that was produced by somebody in Serbia that was called Village Pretty Flame. I don't know if you've heard about the movie Pretty Village Pretty Flame.
Yeah.
So and it's a horrible movie. It's a movie that completely humanizes mass murderers. It completely humanizes this ethnic tradition in the Serb national movement, all of it. And so fast forward to 1999, of course, Kosovo is being butchered, and we're all sitting in Sarajevo. I work at this newspaper, and we're receiving reports. We write about it incessantly, and then we sort of laid the newspaper to bed on Thursdays, and it was a Thursday when NATO bombing started, and we already laid the issue for that week to bed. But then we realized that the bombing was going on, and we all went back to the office, changed the cover page into a photo of U.S. Tomahawks taking off from somewhere in the Adriatic, added the title Pretty Village, Pretty Flame, went out, bought a shitload of alcohol, and really celebrated that. So, and this is what it looked like from Bosnia for us, okay? I'm not saying we did the right thing. I'm not saying we did anybody else would have done it or somebody else would have done it in our place, but that's how it felt. Belgrade getting punished finally after 9 years, almost 10 years of pillaging throughout former Yugoslavia was something that we actually felt was a reason to celebrate. Now, I've only visited Kosovo once after that. I've never, I unfortunately didn't have, and I'm really sorry about it, I didn't have a lot of, not even professional relationships. And there's, of course, political issues. We've got this veto on Kosovo recognition, but let me tell you straight away that as far as a lot of us are concerned here, you know, it's as if Bosnia recognized Kosovo already. So, and I think it's this whole idea about, you know, negotiating about facts is something that that's ridiculous. So but you know, we've seen, yeah, don't how can I say, there was a lot of solidarity. There were, you know, back then we still remembered. We don't remember nowadays. You know, when you see all these when you see immigrants traveling through Bosnia, a lot of people nowadays are acting as if they've never been in those shoes, and that's unfortunate. Back then we still remembered, and back then we still sympathized.
Thank you, Emir. Nathan?
Hi, thank you for talking to States. It's really like eye-opening, and I was reading the denial report that you had commissioned on that's on the Memorial website,
Right.
And I was really quite shocked, I guess, about the sort of level of denial that exists about about genocide and about the sort of wider atrocities, and particularly, I mean, I'm not saying I understand, but from a Serbian point of view, I guess that if, you know, that might be a reason to deny it in some way, but it was quite shocking that it's happening within Bosnia itself. And I just wanted to ask, in your career, perhaps also politically, like, how often did you come up against that level of denial, and how prevalent is it?
It happens on a weekly basis. Here's the thing about denial, and again, that's my proposition. I'm never, you know, I recently wrote something about it. I'm waiting for peer review, and I'm kind of hoping not to be butchered. I mean, the article doesn't get butchered, but I have a proposition that essentially, denial is not only an intrinsic part of genocide. You know, the denial starts the moment killing starts, and it does so because essentially people who do the killing need to be able to look at themselves in the mirror. You know, this whole idea of that the individual needs to find sense in their own existence, in the wider picture, in the long history of their community. My proposition is that, usually the social construction process that takes place before the onset of the murder, before the onset of genocide, it extends into genocide denial as well. That the way that victims are constructed, literally constructed, in the years, or if you will, usually years prior to the beginning of murder, is the way that they are actually remembered by the perpetrators after the murder is over. So this sort of social construction extends throughout the entire process. And let me tell you an interesting, well, it's not an anecdote, it's actually a historical fact. So Ratko Mladić, I'm actually sitting where I'm sitting. I can see the place where I actually saw Mladić on July 12th, 1995, through my window. Okay, so Mladić was here, I was here, right? And we could have only seen the same thing here in July 95. So we could have seen tens of thousands of women, children, elderly men who came to surrender themselves, and so on. And I still remember it as such. This is how I remember it. And I don't need to make much of an effort, because all I need to do is I need to go online and look it up on YouTube, right, or anywhere on Google, and I'll find the footage from Potocari from July 1995. Now, interestingly enough, Ratko Mladić gave a speech in December 95, which was carried by the official gazette of the Bosnian Serb Army in January 96. And it was really long and long-winded speech, and Mladić was prone to rants and so on. But there are 2 points in that speech where he kind of veers off into Srebrenica. When I was reading that, I was really shocked by him referring to the people that his men killed as Islamic gladiators and Muslim divisions, so, like armed to the teeth and so on. And then I realized at one point, okay, this must be how this guy remembers this. This must be how this the social practice of calling us Turks, calling us Asiatic plague. This construct that they created in order to begin the murder extends into how they actually remember the events. And this guy probably convinced himself that is what he had seen.
So you are talking about social conditioning.
Social conditioning, social construction. I'm talking about
Bergman, so they are conditioned
right,
to think that when they see groups of Muslims, there must be some
they must be Islamic gladiators, and quote unquote. And I believe that kind of, and I also believe that denial is not necessarily. The denial might even be interpreted as a way of remembering something. As a sort of anti-memory. And because the politics that were back in place in the 90s is still in place, I believe that this sort of social construct created in the 90s is still very much alive, and it affects how Bosnian Serb political class now, or factors into the decision-making process of the Bosnian Serb and Serbia proper political class today.
Thank you so much, Emir. And Emina Suljagić, it's your chance to discover whether you are related to Emir, I guess.
I'm pretty sure we are.
This is the last question.
We are related.
We are related.
I found out. Hi. Also, thank you for sharing your story. It was really touching. What I wanted to ask is, did you ever get closure? And if you didn't, what could help in order for you and the rest of the Bosniaks to get that closure?
I don't know. Closure is a funky word. It's like almost as funky as reconciliation. So I'm not really sure about what. I can't imagine closure. Okay, if it's being at peace with what happened to me, I'm not really sure that is possible, that can happen. There are ways, there are levels on which this is going to haunt me forever. I've learned to live with that. I take solace in the fact that I still get to hang out and spend time and enjoy myself with people that I grew up with, who live here or elsewhere. I take solace and comfort in the fact that there are some of us still alive, that there is going to be a next generation, whether here in Srebrenica or in the Netherlands, which is where I suppose you are. Yeah. But the idea of a closure, listen, I believe there's, what's far more important than closure in my mind. Once again, I'm not a psychologist, so and I'm really skeptical about the whole science of psychology. No offense intended to anybody here. But what I believe is far more important is to ensure that you're never so weak for anyone to even think that they might do it and get away with it. That's, if you're asking me what's important, then I'd say that is the single most important thing. Because 25 years later, especially you and I, 25 years after Srebrenica is the moment for us to think about how weak we had to be for anyone to think that they can actually do that to us and not suffer unacceptably high losses.
Can I?
And that's that's the way I see it. Don't think that there aren't people out there who are still thinking, or at least thinking about it. And sometimes thinking is more than enough. I've spent last few months working on. I'm working on a research, and part of it is it's focused on the Bosnian Serb Assembly, And now again, nice will know what I'm talking about. It's like a it's probably one of the most unique parliaments in the world, in the sense that, you know, the decisions that they took, and the entire process that went on for 3 years. So these guys didn't sit down in April or May 1992, decided to kill us all, and then moved on and met back again in 1995. No, they sat down every, you know, once in 2 months at the very least. Karadzic would get out, you know, he'd take the podium, tell them how things, you know, give them the layout of the land, tell them how things are, and then they would make decisions, reaffirming their initial decisions again and again and again and again. And they discussed every single aspect of the mass murder, of the eradication of the Bosniak Bosniaks from Bosnia, you know, Bosnian Muslims. You know, and you could actually even call it, you know, genocide by plebiscite. Trust me, that's how widespread this consensus was within the Bosnian Serb elites that we are supposed to be eradicated. You know, the Radovan Karadzic said at one point that he doesn't want another Serb generation wasted in the process of neutralization of Islam. Now, and you know, there are really some funky words that these guys are using. Trust me, it's just unbelievable. You know, you should hear Trifko Radić from Iljaš, or Suljagić from Prijedor. I mean, you wouldn't believe what these guys are saying, and they're saying it for the record. They're aware that this is being recorded, and that they believe that they're taking part in history. And you wouldn't believe one other thing about that. You wouldn't believe how much references to Njegoš and Ivo Andrić there are. It's unbelievable. But these guys are, you know, there was this entire wealth of imagery and ideas and concepts that they could draw on in order to continue what they believed was a process of actually, Karadzic saw himself as the direct descendant of Karadzic. And not only literally, you know, not only in interviews with Western press that he could impress by his temple, but actually, you know, he believed that what the Serbs in Bosnia were doing between 92 and 95 was the continuation of the liberation, you know, national renaissance and liberation from the Ottoman yoke. So those ideas, and I'm sorry, I'm going to round this up now. Those ideas are still out there. People calling Turks are still out there. And the only reason that they will stay away, the only way that they will stay away, is that if they know that if they try to do something, they will have to suffer losses that are unacceptable. I'm sorry, it was
it's extremely useful, and it's very good that it doesn't come from history books, because we do not have this linear chronological explanation what is happening. But these things are not something that you draw from a history book, a textbook, but you actually construct this sort of narrative from their official quasi-state documents, because and that makes it scary and very, very serious. Thank you so much. 11:15, so Emina, go ahead. The last question, and then we will move on to our next.
So, well, first of all, is it all right with Emir, because we are into the time
don't worry,
of his meeting?
Don't worry, I'll get it done. They need
okay, Emina?
So yesterday, also with this Zoom conference, we talked about how Serbia was never prosecuted as a state. Isn't that actually Serbia as a state getting away with what they did?
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. I mean, what you know, and again, if you have an opportunity to ask Suljagić about it more, because I was really shocked. I was there when Serbian government came to The Hague and made an argument that was in simplest terms put like this. It is in the national interest of the Republic of Serbia to conceal its involvement in a genocidal operation in another country, and the court accepted it. And I know that the Suljagić was, you know, strongly opposing that. There were people in the prosecution's office who were above him who agreed to that. So yeah, Serbia got away with that. But listen, it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world is out to get us. There's another thing. There's lawyers here, I suppose, so I'm going to tread this very carefully. But one of the basic principles of the international law is that, you know, legal is everything that is actually backed up by a sufficient amount of force is legal. Very simple. You know, states have created this legal universe where they get literally all the rights. They get away with everything. Serbia as a state appeared in front of a UN court and literally called upon its rights enshrined in the UN Charter. End of story. And they got away with it, even though that, 2 years earlier they were actually involved in genocide in another country. So, and that tells you something about the importance and the staying power of state also.
Thank you so much, Emir. It has been 1 hour and 15 minutes, and seeing the faces on the display, we could go on for another hour just with you, but it wouldn't be fair on you and on our other speakers, because we asked you.
Not gonna be fair on me. Trust me, this is like by far the fairest thing that will happen to me today.
Okay, thank you so much. We will stay in touch, and we are going to organize our autumn conference if Corona crisis allows us, and I hope that will be beginning of a very fruitful cooperation. And all of you young people, by this goodbye to and thanks to Emir, it means that we do encourage you to take a keen and proactive interest in learning for yourself what happened in, not just in Bosnia, in Balkans in the 90s, because it does in a curious way affect you in your own national jurisdiction as well, because we see the different variations of the same problem that was inaugurated in the end of the Cold War, because we see now many political forces making our lives more insecure than we ever predicted. So thank you so much, Emir.
And can I just add? Can I add to that and say we hope
absolutely.
We hope, Emir, maybe one way or another to see you this year, and I fully endorse everything Nena says. Sorry.
Thank you so much. So Hassan, how are you doing? Are we keeping you for more important things? Bye bye, Emir. Thank you so much.
To go to. All right, take care, guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye.